It might be the premier election this season.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm not talking about the presidential race. I'm talking about the Cranston mayoral race. And while your eyes may roll at first glance, like, what are you talking about? If you're in Cranston, I think you certainly have a perspective on this. In the primary that we just experienced last week, low voter turnout across the state, predictably. The Cranston Republican primary mayoral race was the talk not only of the city but of the state. And now the question remains for me, and maybe for others, was that the determining race, or is the general election just as competitive? We don't poll a lot when it comes to local municipal races, so you have to use your instinct on this. And here's my instinct. I have no idea. I literally have no idea. I think we have a situation where the influence of the national election and the clear blue state's disposition of Rhode Island may have an impact on Democrats coming out for the mayoral candidate in Cranston, who is that party's candidate. I literally disdain the idea of partisan politics in municipal elections. I think it's one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and Rhode Island personifies the idiocy, really does. And we'll talk to our candidate for mayor about that. He may not agree, but I just think the system is just so dumb. Having said that, it is the system that we have. Let me just explain this to you. A pothole is not left or right. Garbage pickup is not left or right. Police and fire response is not left or right politics. Good schools are not left or right politics. But there's this club atmosphere from town to town in Rhode Island where Democrats and Republicans face off and divvy on councils and all that kind of stuff. And it really has very little to do with the innate nature of ideology, which of course these days is very hard to figure out anyway. It has to do with cliques. And I don't think it's a healthy way to do business. And I think it erodes the chance for some good decisions on the part of the constituents. I'd much rather see a playoff where if 5 people want to run for mayor, the top 2 win in a primary and they face each other. Woonsocket does that, so good for them. Anyway, enough of the speech. I want to talk to the Democratic candidate, but first let's see and remind everybody what happened in Cranston on primary day last week.
Cranston Mayor Ken Hopkins greeting excited supporters after winning the city's hard-fought Republican primary. First elected in 2020, Hopkins says he'll focus on bettering education, supporting public safety, and keeping the city secure if elected to a second term in November.
It's a great night for Cranston. We're going to move forward and continue to do what we've been doing for the last 4 years.
Hopkins also addressed digs and accusations made by his primary opponent, Barbara Ann Fenton Fung. He said the results showed, quote, "You can be a good guy and still win."
People know who I am. I don't cheat, I don't lie, I don't steal. I'm a good person first. Mayor is what my job is. I'm a good person first.
Hopkins said in his victory speech he hopes to move on and unite the city's Republican Party ahead of the general election. Have you spoken to your opponent tonight?
They called and I called them back. We've missed each other. They did reach out to me.
Well, at least that happened. Robert Ferri is the Democratic candidate for this city job. He's a current councilor finishing up his second term, and has had lots of life experience in the private sector. I got a tutorial prior to the broadcast beginning here on the difference between candlepin, duck pin, and regular bowl, 10 pin. Former owner of Town Hall Lane, one of those spots that I'm sure Rhode Island's go, oh yeah, I remember Town Hall Lane, which is now a bank, right?
Yes.
You know,
What else would it have become?
the bank where Town Hall Lanes used to be. Thanks for coming in. I want to talk about my little speech there at the beginning in a second, but give me your gut check on what happened in the primary.
The primary was a very contentious one for the two Republicans. I think it's unfortunate that they spent most of the time just calling each other names and not sticking to many of the issues that we have in Cranston. So I always felt that Ken Hopkins would probably win that primary. He is the mayor, and she did nothing but negative campaign, and I think people are kind of tired of that kind of campaigning.
And she made some assertions that you more or less stayed on the sidelines for until the end, and you put out a statement suggesting that if something is true, then some investigation needs to be done, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's no doubt that they were at each other's throats, and I think what finished her off, or finished off her chances of making an upset here, was that flyer that went out that accused her more of liberal voting record on things like kids getting free college education, immigrant kids. I think it was a twist. I think it was a manipulation. I think it was an unfair attack on her and her voting record. At the same time, I understand why the Hopkins campaign decided to, whack her, because all she did was, pick on his family and find issues that were of personal nature, and it was kind of
He took a few swings back at her. I
Right,
mean,
yeah.
She did take a lot of swings at him, so he took a few back at her.
So what is your disposition as you look at that? Are you hoping that the tone of this sprint toward Election Day is different between you and Ken Hopkins?
Yes, I think that my strategy is basically going to be that we're going to stick to the issues. We're not going to make it a personal thing. And I think the problems we have in Cranston is why I'm running for mayor, and I'm going to just express what I think they are and how I think I'm going to solve them.
Ken says twice in that news package, I'm a good guy, I'm a good guy. And I have no reason to believe he's not. I don't know him very well, but he has a reputation of being a pretty decent guy. But when you have to say it, I get worried, not about his character, but just it's a weird thing. Sometimes things speak for themselves, and he's trying to articulate that he's a good guy. Is he a good guy?
From what I know, he's a good guy. If I thought he was a good mayor, I wouldn't be running for mayor.
Tell me about the distinction.
Ken Hopkins said in that little clip there that, he's the mayor. He loves to be the mayor of Cranston. He likes to be the guy that's running around cutting ribbons and showing his face and sitting in front of the camera all the time.
Well, he said, I'm a good guy first. Mayor's my job.
Yeah. Robert Ferri, the distinction between him and I is that I want to be the mayor that's sitting at his desk, solving the problems that the city has, looking at the finances, making sure we can afford to pay our bills, making sure that we're keeping our taxes low. That's the mayor I want to be. I'll still be the mayor that's visible, and I'll still attend all the things that are going to help the schools and the sporting programs and everything, but my concern is to be sitting at my desk and figuring out how to make Cranston a better place for everyone.
This is where it gets difficult for people who are not living in the city, myself included, to try to figure out what's wrong then, right? So what's not operating correctly. Because Ken Hopkins, I'm sure if he was sitting here, and I think he's going to pop in next week, would probably say, I'm doing those things. I'm making sure the finances. He talks about, having inherited deficit from Alan Fung. I mean, that breakup, by the way, between the Fung, Fenton Fung, and Hopkins, they were like three musketeers in politics, and that whole thing kind of blew up. But she never was able to make it stick, what big mistakes he was making. There's always the Bud Lung pool thing, and there's always the little, and where do you put the gun range, and the stuff of making municipal decisions. But has he been incompetent?
I want to use one example that I feel very strongly about, and this happened in their last debate. He finally admitted that when he became the mayor, he inherited $7 or $8 million structural deficit. Okay, he admitted it. And then he was asked, why didn't you tell anybody? So he kept it a secret for like 2 years. So why would you keep something like that a secret for 2 years when the constituents of
What's
Cranston...
the answer?
The answer is he was trying to not throw Alan Fung under the bus, because Alan Fung and Barbara Ann Fenton Fung basically picked him to be the mayor. They supported him and they endorsed him.
Political loyalty caused him not to be transparent about the budget, is what you're
Yes.
telling me.
I would never do that. If I become the mayor, when I become the mayor, if we have a $10 million surplus, I'm going to tell everybody. And I'm going to ask the constituents, how should we spend it? And if we have a $10 million deficit, I'm going to tell the constituents, we have a $10 million deficit. We got to figure out how we're going to replace that money. That's the way it should have been handled. You don't keep something like that a secret. I just think that is just an enormous misjudgment of character.
How does it become secret when there's a legislative body, it's known as a town council, city council, that you sit on?
The money was buried in the health plan part of the budget, where we're self-insured. So when you make out a budget, you can say we're going to spend 20 million, 30 million, 10 million, 5 million. It doesn't really matter. You're just putting a number in there. So they hid that amount of money in the health plan part of the budget. Now, I'm not being really specific here. I think the number was actually 7.8 million. It could have been 7.9. You know, and that's what happened. So there stood an $8 million structural deficit that was on the books. And in accounting ways, they hide things like that. I would never do something like that.
What is the city's current fiscal health?
Well, we just spent over $30 million of COVID funds, and we haven't identified how we're going to replace them. So even though from an accounting standpoint, on paper, it looks like
they were operational uses?
we used most of the money to pay bills, okay? Budget shortfalls. That's what we used most of the money for, except $5 million is going towards the pool. So we did not, we have not shown how we're going to replace that revenue.
Kind of manna from heaven, you're asserting manna from heaven that helped plug deficits.
Exactly. So
There are a lot
if
of communities out there that made that move. I was hoping that all federal dough that came from COVID would be one-time and capital expense so that they weren't part of recurring obligations or programs. You're suggesting too much of that went to recurring obligations and programs.
Right.
All right. Listen, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the numbers and some of the issues that the councilor feels are important in this mayoral race. There is one little thing that the current mayor probably still has to answer for. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so the Cranston mayor had a little bit of a situation. A lawsuit was filed. I'm absolutely certain it's all part of a political gamesmanship thing, but there's always some element of truth inside these stories, these sagas. And look, I guess, a handful of years ago, Mayor Hopkins fancied a beat-up historic car known as an MG, and that's the initials of his late wife. God bless her. And he just kind of felt a tug in his heart, as he says, and wanted the car. Well, long story short, the guy, gives him the keys, doesn't have a title, blah, blah, blah. He takes the car, you fix it. He says he had this, kind of informal agreement, which may make sense to a lot of people. But, he did put it on the road without the proper registration, and hasn't driven it regularly, to his credit, but he's been kind of caught, in photos on the streets. And this was a whole thing that Fenton Fung tried to make a deal of. You kind of jumped into the fracas at the end, prior to the primary, suggesting that if something was illegal, then something's... What is that?
Well,
it's like if you got to say something, spit it out.
I
right?
was trying to not join in the negative Republican campaign.
But you could. It's like taking a bite of a chocolate cake. You had to do it. You had to.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because there was a lot of pressure on me. People calling me saying you got to say something. Can I say something now?
Sure. That's why you're here.
All right. This is how I feel about the whole thing with the MG. The guy tossed him the keys for whatever reason. I don't know what agreement they made. I don't know what handshake they made. I have no idea. I don't think anybody does. But he took the car, and he put the city plate on it, and he drove it uninsured and unregistered at least 2 or 3 times that we know of. I just think that in itself is not something you should do if you're the mayor of a city. You're taking a car without a title, not registering it, and you're driving it. Okay, so that's the first thing. So as I'm knocking on people's doors, canvassing, 9 out of 10 people, the first thing they ask me, what's going on with the car?
Yeah,
And this is what I'm
it's
telling them. I'm giving them the same answer I'm giving you right now. I don't really know, but
Is that still resonating in the community?
absolutely.
You think it's a hurdle he still needs to get over in the general election?
2 other people that are running for council on the Democratic side have called me up and said, every single time somebody answers the door, they want to know about the car.
I was told prior to the primary by a source close to the council, and again, I don't follow city council business in Cranston, so I'm no expert on this, okay?
Give me a call anytime. I'd be glad to fill you
Well,
in.
thanks, I appreciate it, because it's an important community in our state, no doubt. But that the city council was pondering a resolution, a formal resolution speaking to this car controversy. Is that being contemplated on?
It is.
It is.
It is.
Is that going to happen?
I think it will.
Are you an architect of that?
I am not.
Will you have input on the language?
I've been asked what I think about the whole situation, and I've given that.
I'm guessing it'll be a resolve of some kind that says he should never have done it. Will the word corruption be used?
I don't think it'll be an attack. I think it'll be just a general inquiry.
Meaning a call for an investigation?
No, a call for an explanation.
Well, he explained it pretty clearly on the radio with me the other day. I'll send you the tape. But you also, proffered when we asked for a couple of subjects that you were interested in, this notion of talking about, let me just make sure I got it right, transparency and anti-corruption. Well, you talked about the budget transparency, so I think you've covered that. What corruption? Is there corruption in the city?
Using the word corruption is, it's a strong word. I think that there's a lot.
Well, you sent it to me. Your campaign sent it to me.
We sent that to him.
Transparency and anti-corruption.
Okay, so I was on the Contracts and Purchasing Board before I was on the council. Okay, and I always noticed one thing very clearly: the city of Cranston does a lot of business on bid waivers.
Meaning?
If somebody's on the state list to do paving or to build a shed, I'm just thinking of in general, then you can automatically hire them without a bid based on the fact that it needs to be done kind of right away. So we do an enormous amount of business like that.
So the urgency carries the day.
Yeah, but you can make things urgent if you want, and you can say that they're urgent.
So are you proposing a formal change to that process?
There needs to be some type of change.
Can't
yes.
the council draft legislation?
You'd have to go back to the charter and rewrite how the Contracts and Purchasing Board operates.
So?
It can be done. It can be done.
Have you asked for that on the council?
Not yet.
Is that the purview of the council or the administration?
I'm not exactly sure.
Then why would you bring it up as an issue to have to be resolved when you're not sure what the
Because
solution is?
I think that we're not having a fair bidding process to all the work that's being done in the city. That we're using the same contractors over and over again. And we need to open up the bidding process. When I owned my businesses...
It seems to me in order to do that, you're going to have to make some of this charter change. Or I guess the discretion of the administration might cover it. Are you saying style versus new ordinance
I think style
could
probably
resolve the matter?
Style could resolve the majority of the matter. When I owned my own businesses, if I had a supplier, every once in a while I'd check other suppliers to see if the price I was paying is really still the price, or are they slowly increasing it to the point where they're not competitive anymore because I'm not checking the other prices.
All right, let me jump around a couple other things. The schools you mentioned, investing in strong public schools. No one's going to argue with that. Cranston schools are pretty well reputed, I think. I find that we have a governance problem here in the state of Rhode Island. That you'll be at the local supermarket as the mayor, and someone will say, hey, Mayor Ferri, something going on in the schools, and your honest response will have to be, you know what, I don't make those decisions. Because all the city side does is fund. It doesn't have a hand in operations of the school system. Whereas in Massachusetts, mayors sit as chairpeople of school committees. There's a Rhode Island governance model problem that I think has caused too much separation and even litigation between school departments and city governments. Do you agree that that's a problem? And would you like to have a more hands-on approach to the schools?
It would be nice if the mayor had a little more hands-on choice, but in Cranston you don't. So I think
in Rhode Island you don't.
I think your job as the mayor has got to be to have an open relationship with the superintendent of the schools and the financial director
And
of the
open what? To
schools.
say, hey, what do you think about those Patriots? Because really you have no authority or governance position.
Have an understanding of why they ask for what they ask for and why they do what they do, and maybe be part of the process.
Well,
to
it
help.
seems to me that the League of Cities and Towns ought to be talking about this, and you're one of the chief cities in the state, that whoever's leading these cities ought to be able to start talking about changing that dynamic. Because I think mayors, are talented enough to be able to, and important enough to be able to have a significant role in governing and having at least some responsibility and authority when it comes to the school systems, input, management, some kind. And there's really very little, very little.
Well, in Cranston, we have a very good superintendent, and we have a very good chief financial officer. I know both of them, and
But that's a crapshoot.
well,
It depends on the talent.
we're lucky to have two really good people.
Well,
and-
I think the system is broken. When we come back, we'll talk about the politics of municipal elections and the final thought from our candidates. Stay with us. That can't be correct. They tell me I only have 38 seconds or so in this particular segment. Anyway, I'm just going to ask you the question. Do you believe there ought to be partisan politics in local elections?
Yes, I think you asked me that one time when we did a radio interview.
Right.
I do, especially on city council. There should be no Republican or Democrat city council people. They should all be
Oh, so you agree with me?
unaffiliated. Yeah, I do agree with you on that.
So you're forced into this whole dynamic.
Right, yeah.
General election is coming. You're going to be part of it. Are you hoping for a wave of Kamala Harris voters to just use their partisan instinct and vote Democrat?
I want people to vote for me as a Democrat because I'm the best candidate to manage the city. And it's like sometimes I ring somebody's bell and they go, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" And I say I'm a Democrat. They go, "Oh, I'm going to vote for you." I go, "Are you going to vote for me just because I'm a Democrat? Don't you want to know anything about me?" And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
That's fair. Well, look, 10 seconds on why you should be the mayor.
I should be the mayor of Cranston because I'm going to bring back the honesty and integrity to the city's office. I'm going to listen to people. I'm going to take their advice. I'm going to bring the best possible people to the table to help me solve the problems that the city of Cranston has.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your company.
I have a present for you.
Oh, you do?
Yes, I
Yeah,
do.
well, I'll show everybody what it was when we come back. The final word. Oh, I got a pen. Yeah, it was a pen, and it's Robert. What is it? It's ferryforcranston.com. In case you're interested. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.